Welcome to the Sound of Movement podcast. Today we've got a really great topic. We're going to be talking about flexibility training and how you design programs to get really flexible. This is something that I'm very passionate about. It was about 6 years ago that I made the decision that I was going to become flexible. I've learned a lot in that time and now I'm going to share it with you. Welcome to the show, everyone. It's time to rock. If you're new to the tribe, Rich is behind the mix. Phil's across the table from me. My name's Rad Burmeister, and we are Unity Gym, experts at turning driven people into athletes. This episode is brought to you by the Unify Movement System, the only online program effectively balancing strength, flexibility, and fitness so you can unleash your inner athlete. Get daily coaching by us, plus our Epic Foundations Prep program and revolutionary structural balance blueprint to create your ideal program and optimize your performance. As a valued listener, use the link in the description to get your first month free. Better than that, though, this week we're actually going to be doing a 72-hour flash sale where you can, combined with a 2-week free trial of our UMS, you can get a lifetime discounted price. It's going to be, for as long as you stay with us, you will be on a permanent discount. So look out for that one. That's going to be going out this Wednesday. It's currently Monday in Australia. Now, before we get started, warm welcome if you're on the live stream in the UMS Movement Mastermind Facebook group. Leave a comment and we'll send you some love. Remember that anyone can join and interact. And lastly, a shout out to our YouTube athletes catching the replay. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe if you like what you see. So joining us today, we've got Phil White from ADPT Physio. How are you, Phil?
So well. Always love being back for my first show on a Monday when I'm back in Sydney after being down the coast in Jervis Bay. Feeling delightfully exhausted after hitting a nice little running PB on the weekend. Ran 26.5 Ks, which was quite good fun. And then
26.5.
Yeah,
was
from
like
Manly
to
Manly to Clovelly, which is two different ends of Sydney beaches. So it was really nice to do that with a mate on Saturday, and then played a beach volleyball tournament with my girlfriend yesterday, and we got through the grand final.
Manly to Clovelly, sorry,
Yeah.
It just dawned on me where Clovelly is, south of Bondi, right?
Yeah.
Shit, so you ran from Manly over the bridge and then down to
Yeah,
Clovelly.
the two bridges, Spit and Harbour Bridge. So
no one
for
counts
those, no one
bridge is a bridge though.
Anyway, but, so just a really fun, active weekend, and I'm feeling great and nice to be back on the podcast with you, Rad.
Yeah, nice.
Did you have a nice weekend, nice Mother's Day here in Australia?
I did. I had a good Mother's Day. You know, it's an interesting thing being a father. Of course, you have to actually put some real effort into Mother's Day, or you get your ass kicked. So no, it was really good. My son doesn't really get it yet. He's 4 years old, and he's like, "Where's my presents?" And, it was
What
pretty
about
funny.
me?
But you know, and how are you, Richie? You had a holiday, mate. Tell us all about it.
One sec while I turn my mic up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Rich was away last week, which
Richie-
you can probably tell why. All the
He went down to
I went down to Adelaide to see my family.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
Got to catch up with my niece. I haven't seen her for almost a year. She's grown up so quickly. It was very good to see Mum and my sister and everybody. I don't go home very often, so it was really nice to see everybody.
Yeah,
so nice.
Yeah,
That's
it's
kind of
awesome.
why all the production side of things kind of fell apart last week.
Yeah, man. Oh God,
No Rich,
the whole
everything.
world falls apart without Richard here.
Yeah.
Bloody hell. Yeah, we couldn't even get our shit together to get the podcast started on time, even on the days where we did do it. It was pretty funny. Anyway, so there we go. And I'm going away in. I think I'm going away in 4 weeks now. In exactly 4 weeks from today, I'm going to be having a week off, which is very, very nice. But today, what we're talking about is flexibility training, and this is something that we always have we've got a loose idea of what it is that we're going to be talking about each week. We've got a structure so that we make sure that we deliver good content to those of you out there that are going to give us your time. But before the show, we always talk about how can we. What can we talk about today that's going to add a little bit more value? And we decided that we haven't actually had a show where we've spoken about flexibility and programming for flexibility for quite a while. And it's a hot topic. It's definitely one of the things that people come to us for the most. We see people, Googling flexibility or asking questions about flexibility or downloading our flexibility blueprint. If you haven't got that yet, grab it. There's a link in the description of wherever you're consuming this content. It gives away 10 of the key lessons to developing flexibility that we learned over the, over our time. And I guess one of the biggest revelation for me about flexibility training, because I made it, I'm 43 this year, and I think I was 36 I think I was 36 when I basically made a decision. I said, I'm going to get flexible. I'm tired of not being flexible and I want to get flexible. And I started working on it. And what I was doing 20 years ago when I was doing martial arts versus what's worked for me in the last couple of years is very, very different. And it's got a hell of a lot less to do with, static stretching, with just the old, reach forward, touch your toes and hold it for 30 to 60 seconds and do that 3 times kind of a thing. So, when we look at, I think the first big lesson for me was to treat your stretching as a workout. I think the biggest mistake that I was making in the past was that I was, stretching was always like a bonus thing that I'd do at the end of the workout if I felt like I had enough time for it. And if you think about where the UMS is now compared to that, just that in itself is a huge difference, because we see other gyms where they say that they do flexibility there, but when you go and experience it, you do the workout and then they say, now here's some stretches, do them, and nobody does them because it's not prioritized. If the instructors can't even be bothered to put it in the workout, you when you're really exhausted at the end and you're starting to look at the clock and thinking about your next meal, you just go, oh, bugger it, I'll do some stretching tomorrow. So I think one of the first big changes for us was that we started to treat stretching as a workout. It was a part of the workout. It wasn't like a bonus thing that we did at the end.
Yeah, you very rarely see people being like, oh, I have more time. What am I going to do with all this extra time? Especially where we have the gym here in North Sydney where CBD, people are busy. Like that no one's got the time to stick around and do all these extras. So
yeah, and we did it for a good decade. Yanni and I put a lot of effort into trying to teach people how to stretch. We had these printouts that we gave people that had pictures of all the stretches that we'd show them how to do, and we'd put all this effort into it. And of course, nobody did it. Not one single person did the stretches and got flexible. And I remember, I've got a lot of memory of you looking over my shoulder and giving me your 2 cents when I was going through this process, because at the time, we were always training together. You were doing a lot of your training here. You still do a lot of your training here, but I'm pretty sure you were a little bit more devoted to weightlifting back then. So you were doing strength training 5 days a week. But I remember thinking to myself, I tried saying, I'm going to get flexible, so I'm going to do all my strength training an hour and a half, and then I'm going to do all my flexibility training at the end. And that started getting to the point where I'd go, I'm going to do all my strength training, and then I'll do as much of my flexibility training as I can. And I ended up some days skipping it. Some days I had an hour and a half of flexibility planned in, and I'd basically get through about 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And I remember just saying to myself, stuff this, I'm just going to start doing stretching between my sets because I'm not going to get it done otherwise. And if I don't work out a way to do this better, and then you were looking over my shoulder and every now and then you'd go, oh, Rad, that stretch is actually kind of interfering with this because you're doing X, Y, and Z, and maybe you want to think of this. And then I'd rethink about which stretch I could do on that day instead of this one. And that really evolved into the way that the UMS is now, where it's a 1-to-1 strength and stretching ratio. And so that idea of treating your stretching as a workout, that was the first massive breakthrough I'd say us, because I was the one that pioneered the way with flexibility in this gym. And Richard and Yanni and everybody kind of, followed me with it. So that was the first big breakthrough for everyone to go, yeah, all right, let's do it as part of the workout.
Yeah, I think it's got such great benefits as well for the strength components, which we'll get into later in the week about training for strength. But rest,
we're doing that tomorrow, aren't we, Phil?
Yeah, exactly. So rest is an essential part of strength training, and often people who are in a class just want to kind of rush through things and will often, can't stand the idea of resting for a whole 90 seconds at least, which, coming from a bit of when I was doing a lot of powerlifting back in a few years ago, and you're doing 5 to 10-minute rest periods. When I see people who can't stand doing 90 seconds of rest, I don't quite get them. But by putting flexibility in there and forcing, it actually enhances the whole workout because you are, stretching to prolong that rest period a bit for your strength training. And that interference we talked about was basically me saying ideally we, when you're stretching a muscle, if you're training a muscle group strength wise, you don't want to be stretching that same muscle group because there has been research into increased injury and also the lack of force production if you are heavily stretching an area. But before we get into this whole you've had a really good overview of sort of the way it's evolved here at the gym, but one thing from a physio perspective that I really want to get out of the way first is basically like, why are you stretching? Because this is a thing that I come across a lot as a physio, where people come in to see me with an injury and they're like, I must be having like 70% of my patients say, I always ask people what they think their injury is and why they think they got it, and then what they think will make it better. And 70% of people say, I'm probably just not stretching enough.
Yep.
And it's something that I have mentioned on the podcast before, but I think it's just a really interesting thing how stretching and flexibility has got this sort of cultural like status as a cure-all for all injuries and all aches and pains. Yeah. And, I totally and I can understand that feeling, because when you're feeling stiff and if you can't reach certain range of the motion, like there's like that's a good sign that your body isn't probably functioning at its best, and stretching is generally how you most people think of as the way to improve range of motion. So I understand where it kind of comes from, but it's a really can be quite challenging for people to think like, okay, it's not like the process of stretching and pushing your flexibility isn't necessarily the thing that's going to make you short term less sore and long term more injury resilient. Because with the thing with flexibility is if you're really building large ranges of motion, then that's a whole lot more range of motion that you have to then be able to control. And if you think about a lot of the top athletes in the world who, depending on their sport, like for team sports, for example, often they aren't super flexible, and often the runners, aren't super flexible, but because that's actually detrimental to their sport, because then they need to control more ranges of motion. So you really want to think about why you're doing flexibility. And I'm a big fan of increasing your range of motion, but I just want to get that idea that it's a magical cure-all for all aches and pains and injuries is
incorrect.
Yeah. And really, like, you've got to be thinking about how you what your activities or sports or demands need, and then gradually building up to there. And range of motion can be such a challenging variable. Like when we talk about all the different variables, if we've gone through in the podcast before about the variables that you control to progressively overload something. So, intensity, volume, frequency, rest periods, range of motion. Like range of motion is such a challenging variable to progress, but for some people I think it's like therapeutic to just bash through a really large range of motion. So I just wanted to get that out of the way early, just to make people think like, I'm a big fan of flexibility, but just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. That actually really leads me into my next a key lesson really well. And I'm basically just going through the flexibility blueprint here, because we spend a lot of time, Yanni and I, in brainstorming what were the key lessons that we've learned about flexibility over the last decade. So I feel like I want to use that as the blueprint, excuse the pun, for this discussion. But the second point on the flexibility blueprint is why you should increase joint movement, then strengthen it. And that was a really, really big lesson for me. The idea that, for starters, stretching before a workout is not the right thing to do. You don't want to be, sending that signal through the body, through the muscles, through the joints that it's time to relax and, increase range of motion. We want to be sending the right signal that is conducive towards the work that you're about to be doing. So what we do at Unity Gym is we do mobility exercises, and mobility is very different to stretching, where stretching is something like where you reach forward, grab your foot, hold it, stretch the hamstring for 30 seconds, whereas mobility would be maybe bouncing down to touch the foot, or just squatting deep a couple of times, or basically taking your joints through their full range of motion. But the idea of taking your joints through their full range of motion to access the full range of motion, because when you're cold, you do a little bit of a warm-up, 10 minutes later, I can move better than that now. And then strengthening that new range with good strengthening exercises where you are intentional about your end ranges. You're doing things with real thought behind them. You're working within your comfortable limits, but you're also trying to, access that full range of motion under load with control, is just such a massive part of flexibility training that I never understood, before this journey that I started on 6 years ago. Yeah. What do you think? Mic drop?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, such a huge part of when how I've seen the Unity program change over the years, and seeing your training change over the years. Like the amount of, I think, flexibility, like what conventionally would have been seen as flexibility work that you do now is, less than people would probably expect. But, for anyone who's gone through the 18-minute stretch routine and then the developments into the mobility routines and the loaded stretching and all that will have had a pretty good insight to that idea of how you can do more than just static stretching. But I think another big part of it is that idea of like strengthening through range and using weightlifting movements, but under load as a way of controlling and range of motion, doing things like animal flow where you're having to take your body through full range of motion and with control and support. Like that's that idea of strengthening range, like kind of accessing range and then reinforcing that range with strength, then accessing more range, reinforcing that range with strength is just, such a key concept and so different from what old school stretching was.
In the last 6 to 8 months of my training, I have done such a small amount of flexibility training. Even the principles of what we're talking about here, like I used to do a lot of loaded eccentrics and a lot of loaded isometrics and a lot of end range strength, like strengthening opposing muscle groups at the end range, in the shortened range. You remember my workouts, I did a lot of that and it was grueling stuff. It was very challenging. You remember when I was doing those deficit straddle up splits and stuff? But
you could not pay me to do what you're doing.
And the reason why I don't do as much of it anymore now is because I've gotten to a point of diminishing returns where I've come to a point where the payoff for the time invested is very small for me. I think I'm hitting, I'm going to say it, the limit of my genetics. But I think my hips have come to that point where it doesn't matter how much harder I stretch them, they just don't want to go that much further. And the amount of effort that I put in the last 12 months before this 8-month period that I'm talking about now, for the reward, the payoff that I got was nothing compared to the 12 months before that. But that said, with probably about 10% of the amount of the volume of work, I'm able to easily maintain 90% of my flexibility that I got from all the hard work. So,
which, if you've been paying attention to our talks about strength training and how you develop strength and maintain strength, very similar.
Exactly.
And so treating it in the same kind of way.
You were saying it's like 1/9 of the work to maintain 90% of the gains, right?
Yeah.
With strength training. Yeah. So if you were doing like 2 days of doing 5 sets of pull-ups to be able to get up to 10 pull-ups, you could pretty much maintain about 9 pull-ups if you did 1 set of max effort a week.
Yeah, the study that was like particularly for this was 3 sets of the same exercises 3 times a week, and they basically looked at a 6-week training block and then had people who did absolutely nothing, did like half, a third, a sixth, and a ninth. Yep. So basically, and it was, if you had adequate intensity, doing just one set of one of the days was enough to pretty much maintain your strength. So it's really
amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing, and it's a really, I think, encouraging thing when you have those busy weeks where you're like, I just can't make it to the gym. It's like, just do something. And it's exactly the same flexibility.
It's really encouraging because, to highlight what we're basically saying here is that you have to work hard to achieve a level of flexibility that you don't have. Is probably a no-brainer, but to maintain it is very, very easy. And the way that I maintain most of my flexibility training now is through being very intentional with my end ranges, and then just here and there, I'll just jump down into the splits. When I'm warmed up, I'll do a few loaded Cossack squats. I'll do some 360 hip mobility. I do a lot of squatting, a lot of very deep squatting and movement, through my squat, and my locomotion and flow work. And anyway.
And I think, I think it's good to look at that, because I think when you're talking about how you sort of decided like the diminishing returns are kind of not worth it for you, and I think again that comes back to your why. Like your reason for, I think, flexibility early on was kind of like to, I don't know, achieve these certain benchmarks, and to kind of, it was a bit of like a,
it was so that I could do calisthenics and body weight and locomotion and flow and soft acrobatic movements, that I realized very quickly. I was like, wow, it doesn't matter how hard I try, if I'm not flexible enough, my body just can't do it. Like, you can try all you want, but if you can't do a decent back bridge, then going backwards is very dangerous for your shoulders, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that kind of shift from being like, first off, just trying to hit like specific flexibility benchmarks for the sake of like hitting those benchmarks, and then but then actually like more and more shifting towards like, okay, what do I actually need for my particular activity, and your particular activity being calisthenics. So like you have those certain areas, and then it's like by putting so much more effort and so much more time into flexibility, then you're taking away the like
exactly right.
what you could be doing to actually hit your.
That's exactly right, and it's become the thing for me that I am not the weakest at. I am much weaker at other things, so it just makes more sense to put the effort into those things that I have a greater, chance for return on that effort.
I just do really like highlighting this idea about like thinking about what the activity you want to do and really like optimizing your training for it. And I think the UMS is such a wonderful program, like as it stands as like a general preparation for most sports in the world, but then this is that kind of next level of like how you then can tweak the UMS to really get you towards your goals. And that's what we do a lot in the online coaching group, is help people with like how to, like I've just been doing some online consultations with a few patients, and we've just been looking at like, okay, like the foundations of the UMS get you most of the way there, but what do we need to just like bring up the levels a little bit on this, and then what weaknesses do we have to work on and just tweak it. But so just having that idea of your end goal, and if you don't have an end goal, then just doing a good general list. But
keep doing the UMS. It's it is really beautiful the way the program works like that, because for somebody like yourself, with your understanding of it and with your education and passion, you can come in and work with people like that and just tweak what it is that we do to give them that little extra bit. It is a pretty cool sort of ecosystem like that, isn't it?
Programming for me is so much easier.
Yeah.
Dream.
It's
so good.
Not having to come up with something from scratch, or not having to look at what somebody does and going, okay, let's burn that, and we're going to start,
And because people who come through the UMS are just already so like engaged in what they're doing, and just need a little bit of help on it. It's the dream to work with them.
So the next key lesson for me was why you must mobilize and then strengthen opposing muscles. And the idea of that is that, so we'll use this forward fold or pike or touching your toes example. The idea of being able to reach all the way forward, grab your hands around your feet, and then, pull your chest down towards your knees so you're stretching your hamstrings. To be able to do that level of flexibility is good. It is useful. It is better than not being able to touch your toes. But what's even better is if you can reach forward under your own volition without grabbing onto your feet, so just reaching forward, and then actively lift your legs up. When you can do that level of control that you have in your body, and the way that you can express that, and that one movement, for example, is essential for a press to handstand, but you can talk about it with your shoulders, right? Compression strength, of course. I mean, you can do it with any joint in the body, like being able to actively pull into extreme ranges of external rotation and internal rotation with the shoulders or whatever it is. But it's the idea of, it's not just creating flexibility in a muscle group, it's about strengthening that opposing muscle group in the end ranges. And that was a really, really big lesson for me. And the more I understand about flexibility training and just general strength and injury risk prevention, I think that's been a really, really valuable lesson for us, and a cornerstone to the way that we teach flexibility training in the UMS.
Yeah, and why that is so like hard for anyone who's tried compression strength, as we used to do these podcasts where we'd go out in the gym floor back in the day,
check out on YouTube. There's some videos of me taking Phil through a press to handstand workout.
Yeah, if you want to see me looking really grim, go back and watch those. But with muscles, they are strongest in their mid-range, and when you go to those limits of range, so when they're most stretched and most compressed, they're going to be weaker until you train that specific range. So the loaded stretching that that Rad has talked about just before is a way of really strengthening up that end range of the most lengthened, but this compression strength is now looking at the opposing muscle group and really training that. And if you can get that sort of full spectrum of strength throughout end ranges on both ends of the spectrum, then you're really going to be doing some good control. And that also then sends feedback to the muscles that are, if you're basically activating an opposing muscle group, that sends like an inhibitory signal to the muscle you're trying to stretch, and so it actually neurochemically relaxes that muscle and forces it to sort of switch off. So more than just like trying to So in this case, with the using your abs and hip flexors to lift your legs and pull yourself forward, like those opposing muscles, that's sending an opposing signal to your hamstrings where they're actually neurochemically relaxing, which is doesn't feel relaxing, but it's it helps you build range.
Massively. So the next point is why I love loaded stretching, so eccentrics and isometrics, and my understanding of it from what I've read is that when you do passive stretching, so we're going to keep using the hamstrings, like just reaching forward, grabbing your feet and completely relaxing. It's not that the muscle fibers become more flexible. They're already flexible. It's that the neural inhibitors, like what Phil was just saying, learn to kick in. They delay when they kick in, and it allows you to become more flexible. And so the muscle fibers will lengthen as you go into that stretch. But with a loaded stretch, meaning, let's say I'm standing up holding 2 dumbbells.
Can I just pause you there? Just when we say lengthen, so when you think about the lengthening, it's not like you're stretching plasticine or a blue tack or anything that like stretches out and gets thinner and stays there. Like basically you've got these little tracks on the muscle that attach and they're sort of intertwined, and then as you lengthen them out, it's like almost like kind of like a train tracks or something. Actin myosin chains, if you look them up.
Yep.
Basically that's what's lengthening. It's going out to I got to figure out a good analogy for that. But carry on. So it's not plasticine stretching.
It's so, man, when I was reading about actin and myosin and everything again recently, it's like, oh my God, it's so hard to explain it properly. But yeah, look up sliding filament theory and actin and myosin. But from my understanding of it, Phil, and is that when you do loaded stretching using either eccentric or isometric contraction. So what an eccentric contraction is, it's where the muscle is contracting as it lengthens. So for example, if you stand up on your feet and you slowly bend forward to touch your toes, your hamstrings are actually going through an eccentric contraction because if they weren't eccentrically contracting, then you'd just drop to your feet. But they are what controls that descent.
Yeah, you drop at the speed that gravity would take you down.
That's
and if you pull yourself down faster than gravity would, that would be the muscles that are flexing.
Yeah. So or an isometric contraction would be where the muscle neither lengthens nor shortens during a contraction, but it is still contracting to prevent you from, just falling forward. When you do that, when you do loaded stretching, you not only increase your range of motion, but you also strengthen the muscle fibers. You can thicken the muscle fibers while you're doing it, just like you would with weightlifting, with strength training, with hypertrophy. And that has far greater application to sporting activities, right? Like, if you think about a runner, it can actually be quite detrimental to be creating more flexibility in the hamstrings without also creating strength and hypertrophy in them.
Yeah, I'd just say with the hypertrophy side of things, I think it's quite unlikely that you get to adequate load to really get like a big hypertrophy response. But what you'd certainly do is get that neural adaptation to develop much more strength within range. Then you'd probably get some amount of like muscle size, but I think it would be pretty minimal. But it's certainly more of that neurological strengthening of that range. I just want to say that because I don't want people to think like,
of course, you're not
I'm going to throw away all bodybuilding principles and
yeah.
just do like loaded eccentrics, because that will unlikely to make you jacked. But it's an amazing way of building up strength in that range. And remember, with flexibility, like it's the reason why your body stiffens up and spasms and cramps is the body wants to protect the vital organs and stop basically you go into ranges that you can't control. So that's why you stiffen up, and you're not just, your muscles don't, when they get tired, just completely relax and go to jelly, because otherwise your bodily, like your internal organs, your structures, your neurovascular structures in your legs, your spinal cord would all be at if you just got fatigued and then went floppy, that would be bad. But fortunately we stiffen up. So with this idea of strengthening end range and getting that neurological strength of those end ranges, that's a great way of basically getting your body to trust that you can control where you're going.
Yeah. So the next point for me, the next key lesson was to understand what the scientific mechanism of flexibility training is. And I used to think that flexibility training was about making your muscles more elastic. I'd heard that analogy a lot. You know, you're stretching, you're lengthening the muscles, you're making them more elastic. But it's a lot more to do with the central nervous system. It's a lot more to do with this basically, you know, tricking the central nervous system into allowing you to go deeper. So there's these neural inhibitors that will kick in and prevent.
I don't like to think about it as tricking as rather getting it to trust that you can.
Trust. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's basically like you're gradually proving to your brain that your body can do what you like, what you want to be able to do with it. But if you try and trick it and just force yourself into it, that's when you get into. But I definitely know what you mean there. But I think that idea of
the best example that I've seen of this demonstrated, and not everybody can do this, but in the workshop that I was in with Ido Portal, he's certainly got somebody up there that demonstrated this quite well, and we've used the example since then. We get somebody to sit on the ground and try and do the middle splits, and they can't do it. But then you get them to stand up and keep their pelvis relatively square and raise one leg up to 90 degrees to the side, and the person can do it. Then you put it down, and then they raise the other leg up to 90 degrees relatively easily. And then you go back down to the ground, and they can't go to 180 degrees. And there's no muscles that connect the left leg to the right leg. There's just a neurological response that when both those legs are pulling apart, the brain goes, oh, stuff this. This is going to not end well, and it stops you from going there. And so the idea of stretching is that you, or flexibility training, I should say, I won't use the word stretching. When you do good flexibility training is that you delay those inhibitors. So instead of them kicking in at 90 degrees over time, they kick in at 100 degrees and then 110. And this is the big takeaway for me from this lesson, is that when you do a good flexibility session, a good stretch session, you that process that Phil and I just described unfolds for you. If you get it wrong, meaning if you stretch to the point of pain, you actually stifle that process. And when Phil was saying you're teaching the brain to trust that you can do this, you actually teach the brain that you can't trust to go there. You reinforce its fears, and it's like basically saying, oh, you were right, don't let me go there next time. And that's why sometimes people experience this. It doesn't matter how much I stretch, I never get more flexible. And the next time I go back, sometimes I can't even go as far as I did in the last one. It's most likely because you actually overstretched and you went to that point of pain.
Yes, exactly right. And so that's you, and you're probably going to get it wrong. If you really want to increase your flexibility, you're probably going to get to the point where you do push too far.
So many times.
Exactly. So I just want to really highlight that if you get it wrong, it's not like you've ruined the trust forever.
Well, I actually learnt about how long muscle tears take to repair from talking to you about this after I'd done several muscle tears in my adductors by doing the middle splits. I must have torn my adductors in the last 6 years at least 10, 15 times. The worst one that I ever dealt with stuck around for a solid probably 12 weeks, but understanding from Phil how long a muscle tear actually takes to heal, it was probably a bit more than that, or maybe I re-tore it, because you've told me that muscles usually repair a muscle tear in about 6 weeks. Is that right?
It completely depends on the grade.
Yeah, really.
But low grade ones can be just, a couple of weeks, or then the worse it gets, the longer it takes. But typically 6 weeks is
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you do stifle the progress, people then often say as well, and this was my approach, oh, well, I've torn the muscles, how long should I rest for and not stretch? And I remember I asked you that, and you said to me, you shouldn't not stretch, just do it at a lower intensity and do it at a level that you can handle. But for the same reason, which we won't go too deep into, that the idea of not training when you're injured is flawed, you taught me that the same thing is about stretching, and that worked really well for me. Like, I basically, when I would tear my adductors, instead of the idea of not stretching at all, I would just do some loaded isometrics at probably about 60 or 70% my capacity. But doing that load, it's it is triggering.
It's sending signal to your body that this is something that you need to send resources to, and you need need that. Now I think this is a good time to me to chime in and just say, this is not medical advice. I'm not doing a physio consultation with anyone out there, so please don't. If you do get injured, work as a professional. Don't just take advice off a podcast. But you can work with me online. if you like.
Yep,
At
that's right.
ABT.
adpt.physio. That's
But yeah,
right.
just to have to throw that one out there.
Of course. Now, we'll fly through these last couple of key lessons before we go to our UMS online coaching call. So the next key lesson was really the difference between flexibility and mobility training. And mobility is basically an umbrella term for anything that takes your joints through full range of motion. So if it takes your joints through full range of motion right to the end of your capabilities, that is mobility training. So a deep squat, a barbell back squat, is mobility training. So a handstand or hanging is mobility training for the shoulders. Whereas flexibility training is more where you are doing exercises that are designed to increase mobility. So that may sound confusing, but when you're doing a workout where you're doing, say, 3 sets of loaded eccentrics or isometrics, the goal is to increase your mobility. Whereas when you do mobility training, the goal is to access your full range of motion of mobility. And if you think of it like this, mobility training is generally done at a much lower intensity, usually as a warm-up or a cool down, whereas flexibility training is more the actual workout to increase your mobility. So that was a big lesson for me to understand that, because I heard this word mobility floating around a lot and I really didn't understand what it was. And I still hear people...
Yeah, we talked through that one a lot.
Yeah, we did. We had to talk through it a lot. But that's my... Now, other people might have a different definition, but that's my favourite definition of it.
Yeah.
So I think... So the last point that I want to talk about really is one of the key lessons was the secret to gaining flexibility and strength together, because we touched on that before. And this is something that I definitely discovered for myself. Not saying that I'm the only one or we're the only people that have ever done it. How could we? There's worlds filled with billions of people. But we did it first. No, I stumbled across it myself. Nobody taught me this one. I'd always been taught that flexibility was done separately to strength training or fitness training, not together at the same time. And I don't really think I would do flexibility training whilst I was doing cardio training at the same time. But for the way that we do it is a set of strength training and then a set of flexibility training on the other end of the body, meaning we do upper body strength workouts and lower body strength workouts. So when we're doing upper body strength training, during the rest periods, we do lower body flexibility training and vice versa. And that has been the real secret for me to getting flexible in my late 30s and early 40s. And probably for you guys as well in your late 20s and early 30s. Has it helped you, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, with my particular sports, put less of an influence. And again, this is how I think the UMS is wonderfully adaptable to each personal need. And for me, like I've got really into, much more running recently. And for me, flexibility is not a big part of for running. So I sort of do just enough to tick over and be fine, but not really trying to push it. So I sort of use that time to do other little things. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just as I said at the beginning, the perfect way of making the most of your rest periods, making things efficient, optimizing your training time. And yeah, I think it's great. But yeah, for Richard, Jesus, he's super flexible. And,
yeah. I mean, Richard never used to do any flexibility training, did you, Richie, before we sort of got the UMS to where it is now? Is that right?
None.
Yeah, none. And he is impressively flexible now. Have you got a nose to floor pancake yet? Have you got your nose on the floor in your?
Yeah. I've gone I won't say chest to floor, but pretty close to it, when I was doing flexibility training quite often.
Yep.
These days I'm a little bit tighter because I'm focusing more on strength and hypertrophy. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and gone from the classic, muscular dude that could barely touch his toes to that has been pretty impressive, and also for somebody who I think probably what's more impressive is that, for me, flexibility training wasn't so hard to do because I decided that it was in alignment with my goals. For Richard, it was quite hard for him to do because it wasn't in alignment with his goals, and it was almost like drawing blood from a stone to try and get him to do it. But eventually he just started to see that, well, I'm standing here doing nothing anyway between my set of bench press and bent over row. I may as well do that little bit of flexibility, and it just adds up, doesn't it?
And anyone who's seen those photos you were taking of him up the back of the gym with the
Yeah, some of those are on Instagram.
Yeah,
you can see them. He's got the rig.
See it has not taken away from the rig.
That's not taken away from the rig at
Also,
all.
when you're working on strength and you've got longer rest periods, it does give you something to do.
Yeah.
Like you've got that downtime to do the hamstrings and do those stretches that you really need the most. But when you're doing hypertrophy training, it does make it a lot harder to squeeze it in because you're very much gassed and out of.
Yeah, I go through times as well. Like I'll go through mesocycles where I just say, okay, I'm just going to, right now I'm absolutely doing it, but where I'll go, look, I'm just going to not focus too much on flexibility because the demands of the hypertrophy training or whatever it is I'm doing now are too high. And then I'll do the opposite at times. I'll think, okay, well, I've got long rest periods. I'm lifting low reps. I've got plenty of time.
And this is as you develop through your training age and you know exactly what you want. That's how you tweak the program, but the foundations are there.
That's it. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in.
Just before we jump off, Stephen Pellegrino has quickly asked, that's why the bottom of my biceps is sore when on the tuck planche when stretched straight out. So yeah, you're basically doing like a isometric end range contraction there. So certainly.
Yep. Awesome.
Always love getting questions. So anyone who watches live, chuck them in.
Throw them in. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tune in tomorrow where we're going to be deconstructing strength training. How do you get really, really strong? And for anyone who is in a UMS online coaching group, jump over to that Facebook page now where we're going to answer your specific coaching questions. See you soon, everyone.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that
It's
far.
the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.